Well, welcome back to this series on building a healthy home. And today, or in this session, we want to talk about the next part. Just if you picture the house, last time we talked about building a spiritual foundation, and then we talked about the two walls. The one wall is trust, and the other wall is commitment. And so picture in your mind, or if you're drawing the picture on a piece of paper, picture the first floor now of the house. Now we have the foundation, we have the walls. Now we're building the first floor, and we have two main rooms on the first floor. And the first one, we're going to call it preparing for marriage. That's what we're going to talk about right now, preparing for marriage. So how do we prepare for marriage? Is it really important to prepare for marriage? I mean, people think that it's just all you have to do is just simply, well, get married. We've been dating for 3 years or 1 year or 6 months, or some people will say, well, we've known each other for 2 weeks and we just think that we were made for each other, so let's get married.
And for many people, what they do is they prepare for their wedding. In fact, they spend a lot of time and a lot of money preparing for that wedding day, but they don't really prepare for the marriage. Why is it that we spend thousands and thousands of dollars preparing for something that will just be a few hours, but we don't spend that time preparing for something that will be a lifetime?
We prepare to get a driver's license. We prepare for our future, taking some tests that we sometimes have to take, maybe to go to college or graduate school or doctoral school, or to pursue a doctoral degree. Or there's so many things that we prepare ourselves for. We have to take a test to be an electrician, or to pass the bar exam, or to be a registered nurse, or there's just things that we have to do to prepare ourselves. But yet when it comes to marriage, it's like, well, do we need to?
Yeah.
Well, we feel that preparing for marriage is very important. And what do we mean by preparing or prepare for your marriage? Well, first of all, you need to marry a believer. Paul in 2 Corinthians 6 in verse 14 said those words that I'm sure you have heard very often. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? So he says, if you're going to have a successful relationship, make sure that you marry someone with whom you can share your spiritual beliefs, your spiritual convictions. When a Christian marries an unbeliever, the marriage is immediately in crisis because there is little real fellowship. Now, they may be happy, they may be in love, but they don't enjoy full fellowship, full intimacy in every area of their lives. If my wife is not a believer and I am, sometimes I get to go to church by myself, and you see that very often in church, ladies that are not there, that are there without their husbands, or husbands without their wives. So they're not sharing in some of the most important parts or areas of our life, our expectation of the second coming of Jesus, communion service, baptisms, all those things that we enjoy, that we rejoice in, we're not really enjoying together. And that's what the Bible says is being unequally yoked together.
And if we want our home to have Christ at the center, how much easier is it if we're both on the same page? If we both share that same faith, those faith beliefs, where we can incorporate that into our everyday home life.
And there are many Christians, in fact, many Seventh-day Adventists, who believe that once they're married, the unbelieving spouse will be convicted and become a Christian or an Adventist. Does that ever happen? Oh, yeah, it happens very, very often, or it happens many times. But yet in some cases, what happens is the opposite, that the believing spouse ends up leaving the church because, again, they're just simply not enjoying the same fellowship that married couples enjoy as far as sharing their faith. And sometimes the unbelieving spouse, at first they would say, oh, I respect your choices. You can go to church and do all those things. But yet once they're married, it's like, hey, why don't we take a trip here? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do the other? And little by little, they begin to pull the other person away.
In fact, it's very dangerous to assume that once we get married, that you're going to change. I mean, there's something wrong right there with having that type of belief that marriage is going to change you. You know, I need to understand that when I marry you today, I'm marrying you as you are with your beliefs. Now certainly we do change and we grow together in our marriage, but to make the assumption that your faith beliefs are going to change, there's something very wrong with assuming that.
Now, what if a person is dating someone who is not a member of a church? That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We just hope that that person who is just studying to be a member makes that decision before you even consider marriage, so that it's not just a temporary decision, so that it's not a decision out of interest. You know, I have to do this in order to get married. But once we're married, then I don't have to worry about it. So, you know, pray that the other person, the person that you want to marry, become a Christian, become a Seventh-day Adventist before you even agree to marry them, and not, well, I'll marry you, but first you have to become a member of the church, because they may just be doing it so that they can marry you. The second thing that we recommend, besides marrying a believer, is to inspect the baggage. And what do we mean by that? Well, we all carry a certain amount of emotional and historical baggage in our lives. Some of it comes from our family of origin. You know, our family is one way, and while it's normal to us, it's not necessarily healthy sometimes, and it's not necessarily the same as her family of origin. And so we encourage you to inspect the baggage, and what that means is that you examine each other's family, examine each other's past, how they relate to one another, visit one another's family, observe, listen. You know, how does she relate to her father, for instance, or to her brothers or siblings, and or how does he relate to his mom and the siblings? Because by watching how they relate as a family, you learn a lot of things. You know, are they always arguing and fighting when you get together at home? It's just so much screaming and yelling, or there seems to be good harmony, or is there a sense of fear? People can't say or express their feelings or opinions. You know, what are they at home in the privacy of their home? It's important that you check into that.
And in fact, you know, we talked in the previous session about the importance of honesty in a relationship. So when it comes to inspecting the baggage, there again, we need to go back and look at that family of origin, look at the past, look at the things in our lives that have shaped us to become the person we are today. Because like it or not, those same things will influence our tomorrows. And we need to be aware of those. And the only way we're going to do that is by spending time together and not rushing into the decision of marriage before we've had time to inspect the baggage.
I remember one time when you were the principal of our school, one teacher contacted you and told you that her husband was involved in pornography. And as we talked to her, we asked, you know, when did you become aware of his involvement? And she said, actually, I saw that when we were just dating. His dad had a subscription to a pornographic magazine, and I saw them in their house, but I thought, well, that's his dad. And, you know, once we're married, I'm sure my husband is not involved in that. Well, he was. Obviously, that's what he grew up with. So he continued to be involved in that, and it bothered her, and it was damaging into their relationship. So that's what we say, inspect the baggage, you know, what kind of history there is. You know, there's another bit of history that premarital couples don't look into, and it's finances. Young couples get married or plan to get married, or they do get married, and then they realize, boy, he comes with a lot of student loans and car loans and consumer loans and loans from the family and all that. And suddenly their finances are extremely tight because they haven't even talked about what obligations they may have. In fact, someone suggested that maybe couples should exchange their credit record. on their credit scores to see where they are, because, well, if at least if you choose to marry someone who is deep in debt, at least you should know it before you make that
Right.
decision. Uh, and if you decide to do it, that's your thing. But you don't want to be surprised once you're married and then you find out that when you thought, hey, we're going to one day buy a house and all those things, and then you realize first we're going to have to take care of so much debt, we may never get to the place where we can own our own place. So finances is one thing, family background, family relationships, health also. Is there anything in your family or in your personal health that I need to know about? Some genetic or congenital or a disease, a chronic disease that you have. I think it's good to know, because even though I'm marrying you in sickness and in health, at least let me know if you're sick. If you're healthy, that's all right. But if you're sick, well, I want to know too. Yes, I know that you have this disease or disorder, but I am marrying you understanding that, instead of, again, keeping it secret only to find out later.
And the truth is, when it comes to inspecting the baggage, that sooner or later that baggage is going to crack open.
Yes.
So I mean, even if it comes out bit by bit, so it's better to inspect it before the wedding, before you even decide to get married. Actually, it's better to inspect it, because you're going to find out sooner or later. So let me deal with it sooner.
You also need to settle what we call the leave and cleave issue. And what do we talk about when we say that? Well, if you go back to the first or the second chapter, really, of Genesis, but the first book, the very beginning at creation, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24, God said, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." By the way, those words, not similar words, or the exact same words, are repeated 4 times in the Bible. Genesis chapter 2, Matthew chapter 19, Mark chapter 10, and Ephesians chapter 5. 4 times. It's as if God is saying, listen, pay attention to these words. Don't miss them. But what is he saying there? A man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they then become one flesh. So first, both partners must be willing to leave. I know that after you have been living with your parents all your life, you feel comfortable at home, and then suddenly you have to go someplace else. It's unsettling, it's uncomfortable, but it's not just simply moving to a different home, but rather where your allegiance lies. The moment that you marry someone, your allegiance shifts from your parents to your spouse. In fact, in the Bible, the relationship between a husband and a wife is the most important relationship there is. More important than the relationship between a parent and a child. When God created humans, he didn't create a father and a son, or a mother and a daughter. He created a man and a woman. And not only that, but when Christ, or when Paul talks about the relationship between Christ and his church, he uses the image of marriage. So marriage between one husband, one man, and one woman is an image of the relationship that exists between Christ and his church. And that's why marriage is the most important relationship on earth as far as God is concerned. Doesn't mean that you abandon your parents, that you neglect your parents, that you forget about your parents, but rather that they are not your first and most important allegiance. It's the one between you and your spouse. So leaving, it takes or involves 2 types of surgery of sorts. You sever the cord of dependency, so you're no longer dependent on your parents for help. We are now independent. This is now our home. I can't go back to my parents all the time. I need money for this. I need your help for that. Now, you can ask for advice. You can ask for guidance, yes, but you can't just be depending on your parents. You have to make life yourselves. And then also that means severing the cord of allegiance, which what that means is that before the wedding day, your most important significant relationships were with your mother and your father. But during that ceremony, when you say I do, that cord of allegiance is severed. And now the relationship with your spouse is the one that takes preeminence. It takes the priority. It becomes the most important relationship to you, or should.
Now, you talked about leaving. So scripture says you should leave, but it also says you should cleave. So what does cleave mean? Well, the word cleave actually means to lean toward or be joined with your partner. To cleave to your marriage partner means to choose your spouse above all others, even yourself. You cleave, you lean towards, you join your partner by meeting their needs, hearing their words, and understanding their feelings. Cleave also means for physical fulfillment and enjoyment. So obviously that sexual relationship is exclusive to the marriage relationship.
The fourth thing that you need to do as you prepare for marriage, or at least we encourage you to do, is to take your time. I know sometimes you hear of someone famous. One person that comes to mind, I think that was Britney Spears, who went to Las Vegas for a weekend, and before the weekend was over, she was married. And not long after that, she was divorced. And so sometimes famous people lead you to believe that if you're in love with someone, you just simply go ahead and marry them quickly, because I mean, the faster you do it, I guess the better the chances you have of not losing that person. I guess that's what the mentality is. But we encourage people to take your time, get to know each other, don't rush into marriage. In fact, sometimes people say, well, how long do you think a couple should date? You know, some people have called the first year of marriage the Halloween year, not because it's scary, but because, you know, at Halloween, what do kids do?
They wear masks.
They wear masks. And so during the first year of marriage, people tend to wear emotional masks. We sort of protect ourselves. We hide some things from each other, so to speak. We tend to be more polite and more careful and more patient. After a year, you feel more comfortable with one another. And so the mask comes off and the real you comes out. And so it's better to date at least 1 year. And a long distance relationship, that doesn't count, because you're not really seeing each other on a day-to-day basis, how you act. You only act your best when you're on the screen or on camera. And so at least 1 year of actual interaction together in the same location before you think about getting married. So take your time, get to know the other person's family during that time. Get to know as much as possible about the other person. And again, do it in person, not online. And nowadays that we have Zoom and that we have computer, internet and all those things, well, people sometimes meet people from other parts of the world. And we have run into those kinds of couples that, boy, they meet and they date for sometimes 6 months or a year, and then suddenly they are getting married without even spending one time together in person, or spending just a couple of days here and there in person. Get to know each other. Spend time getting to know each other, how you act, how you interact, how you function together for as long as possible, without being obviously 10 years. We recommend 1 to 2 years of actual dating time, and then to spend time in a marriage preparation program. And one that we recommend is called Prepare Enrich. Is the most widely used program. You can look it up, prepare-enrich.com. I'm sure that there are facilitators in your area. So take the time to prepare for marriage. Don't rush it. Just take the time before you make that important decision.
In fact, we were together 3 years
3 years.
before we got married.
Took her 3 years to convince me to marry her.
Well, I don't know about that, but
No, we did it, I think, the right way. It was the best thing for us to wait until we were closer to the end of our college, and financially we thought it would be better off at that time. And so we decided to wait those 3 years and got married our last year, and well, like I said, 40 years already together.
40 years married, plus the 3 dating.
43 together. That's a long time. That's
It
a
is.
lifetime.
It is.
It is a lifetime.
So the 5th principle now we're going to talk about is to establish a covenant marriage. You know, marriage is not just another business deal. There are a lot of deals or a lot of contracts we may enter into. You enter into a contract on your home. You know, we recently had some work done on our home. So we had to sign a contract for that remodeling that we did on our home. You actually sign a contract when you purchase a car, a contract, an agreement that you will make those monthly payments. But marriage is not just another contract or another business deal. And too often that's how we see it. But if you think about it, a contract by its very nature means that if one of the parties violate the terms or something, you can annul that contract. You can discontinue it. You can consider it void. And marriage shouldn't be like that. So instead of looking at marriage as another contract you sign, we want you to look at it as a covenant relationship, something that will stand the test of time, despite the ups and downs that will normally occur in life. Look at it not as a contract that you can get rid of or tear up or say it's void, but rather a covenant that will last actually until Jesus comes throughout eternity.
Because it's not just a covenant between the two of you, it's a covenant between the two of you and God.
That's right.
So it's a double covenant of sorts. You're making an individual covenant with God, maybe a triple, an individual covenant with God. You're making a couple covenant with God, and you're making a covenant with each other. So it's a very important part of what your relationship is and what will hold it together. It's what you do, what you consider it to be, not just a legal contract, but this 3-part covenant. And last, and we just mentioned that, is to seek biblically based premarital preparation or premarital counseling. And again, we mentioned Prepare and Enrich as one of the tools. If you don't want to follow that, some people may require something different, but at least to have some sort of premarital preparation, a professional counselor, a pastor, or someone with some kind of training to help you prepare for marriage. The reason we like Prepare and Enrich is because you can take an online inventory, and based on that inventory, the facilitator then helps you in the areas where you need to grow, to make changes, to make your relationship better. So it's not just general principles and ideas, but they're specific to your situation. And for those of you who are married, you can take the enrich part of it. So it's a marriage enrichment program. And again, you take an inventory, and a facilitator then will help you in the areas where you need to grow or to make positive changes in your relationship. So we're still on the first floor of the house. We're going to move from, maybe we could call that the living room. We can now move to the dining room. That's where we eat. So we call that nourishing your family. So you prepare for marriage. Let's say in the living room, you talk with the parents. And I like to have that image of people going from room to room. So now we move to the dining room where we eat. And so we need to nourish our family in order to have a healthy family. And we nourish our family through communication. Communication. In the book of Proverbs, we read that fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. There are really three basic avenues of communication. One is verbal communication. That's what we're doing now, communicating through words. That's verbal communication. Then there is nonverbal body language. Sometimes we say a lot more without words than we do speaking. For instance, I'm going to give you a complete message without saying one word. So you have to watch me carefully, because I'm going to have a complete message without saying one word. See, you roll your eyes, you turn your head, you move your arms. All of that without saying one word says a lot of things. It says like, oh, not again. Oh, I can't believe this. Oh, how stupid. There's so many things that you convey without saying one word. So you have verbal communication, you have nonverbal communication, and then you have written communication. And written communication could be in the form of a letter, a greeting card, but mostly nowadays is done through email and text messages. And while we send a lot of information that way, sometimes we don't communicate feelings. And that's why sometimes we send a text message and what we intend for that text message is not what the other person receives. You know, for instance, if I send a message to my wife that says, what are you doing? I'm just asking for information. I want to know if maybe I can be of help. But maybe she's upset at the moment and she hears or she reads that message and say, what are you doing? Like, are you dumb or what? Or are you wasting time? Or how come you're not telling me? You know, so the intent, the emotional intent is not transmitted. And sometimes there's a lot of misunderstanding. But, you know, again, we usually then communicate that way. Now, of course, some of the people say, well, what about the arts? People communicate through the arts, music. There are different other ways of communicating, but those are the three main ones, either verbal, nonverbal, or written communication.
So we want you to think about communication in your family, in your home. How would you describe it? What are some of the words that you would describe how you communicate with each other? Well, basically, there are three types of communication styles. So as we talk about these, we want you to think about which one of those styles really reflects what happens most of the time in my home. So the first style is a very aggressive type of communication. This is the family that they're actually rude to each other. There may be a lot of screaming in the home, a lot of yelling in the home, a lot of put downs, belittling, sarcasm. Those are the types of things that happen if you're in a home where communication would be described as aggressive.
Then you have the opposite, the passive communicators, and they are communication for them is very strained, very rare. They actually withhold communication or withhold sharing of ideas. And there are the people that would say, well, at least we're not arguing, at least we're not fighting. So, you know, you may be in the same room, but rarely cross any kinds of words other than to say, you know, very simple things. I'm called, do you want something else? It's not an exchange of thoughts or ideas. It's more like the bare minimum type of communication.
In fact, I'll keep my feelings to myself and you keep yours to yourself. We really don't talk a lot and share at a deep level. The third type of communication is what we call assertive communication. And this, of course, is the best kind of communications where every family member is free to express in a very respectful way, to express opinions, ideas, feelings, and we really listen to each other with assertive communication.
Assertiveness means that we are free again to express what we think, what we feel, what we like, what we don't like. So we want people to be assertive in the way that they talk. But besides being assertive, we also need to be good listeners. And in general terms, again, we have seen 4 types of listeners. The first one is the judge, and the judge is the person in the family that they believe they're always right. And so they have already made up their minds and they see no benefit really in listening to what you have to say. They tend to be very negative, very critical, and they voice their opinion instead of listening. You should do this, or this is what I believe, this is what happened. And so it's very difficult to communicate with someone who is not even willing to listen to what you have to say because they've already made up their mind.
And the second type of listener is the counselor. These are the people that, you know, as you're telling a story to, well, you should have, you could have, why didn't you? And you can't even get through the story or your feelings before they're willing to offer their counsel. And sometimes you don't need a counselor. You just need them to be quiet and listen to you. So these are people that, once again, continually interrupt, and they just don't take the time to really listen to what you want to say. They're more interested in what the counsel or what advice they can give you because they think they have all the answers.
Yeah, they just suggest kindly but forcefully what you need to do because they know better.
They know better.
The third kind is the Inquisitor. And this person believes that the way to listen is to constantly shoot questions at the other person. And so they're constantly interrupting. So, I'm trying to tell a story and you have to know all the details, but instead of allowing me to finish the story, you're constantly interrupting me. So, just give you an idea of what that kind of communication might look like. Say, for instance, I come home and I say to my wife, hey, in fact, there's a story that we tell of an actual event that happened when I was a church pastor. And I went to at the hospital where one of my couples, one of the members of the church had just had a baby. And so I went to visit them. I came home and I said, hey, I just went to the hospital. I just came from the hospital from seeing so-and-so because they had a baby. And so
Really? How much did the baby weigh?
I don't remember.
How long was the baby?
I mean, I didn't really get to see him, but anyways.
How many hours was she in labor?
I didn't ask her, but anyways.
What color eyes did the baby have?
Well, the baby was sleeping, so I didn't.
Did the baby have any hair?
No, he had a little baby.
Who did the baby look like?
It's a baby.
Honey, was the baby a boy or was it a girl?
I mean, it had a white hat, so it wasn't blue like boys or pink like girls or yellow or green. I don't know. It was white. I don't know. I don't know what the baby was. It was just a baby. What happened is it gets frustrating because, I'm trying to tell the story and maybe I could have given her some information, but I never even got to that point because she has to ask all these details. Now, I'm not blaming her for that. Women tend to connect at the emotional level through communication. So for them, all those details are not just being nosy, it's how they connect emotionally at that level with everything. They connect the baby with the mom, with another mom, with their own child and their experience. And so they're emotionally, that's what their brain is trying to connect all that information together.
In fact, most women are guilty of this very thing right here, being the inquisitor, always asking questions because we like the details. Whereas men in general look at the big picture. But women want all those little tiny details. And sometimes, most of the time, the man does not have all those details. And we get frustrated, but we continue to ask the questions. So ladies, if you're the inquisitor, you need to watch that.
And one of the reasons why we men don't always have the details is because, again, we don't connect at the emotional level the same way. So for us, what's important is to get the basic information, what we think it's important. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't care. When I was training to be a pastor, when I was in college, I was told that when you go to the hospital to visit someone, keep in mind that the hospital is not a place to rest. There are doctors that come in and go out, nurses that come in and go out, the cleaning person, the person that brings the food, and then the person that takes the tray out, the phlebotomist that take the blood, and the therapist, and all kinds of people go in and out of the room. If you want to get some rest, the hospital is not a place to rest. And after all that is happening, or in the middle of that happening, the pastor shows up. And of course, then they have to kind of entertain the pastor, so to speak, or at least have the visit with the pastor. And so, like teacher said, make sure that as a pastor, you keep your hospital visits brief. Check on the person, ask any questions that are pertinent, but don't extend it too long, and have prayer and leave. When they get home, then you can go back and in a more relaxed atmosphere, have a more comfortable, lengthy visit. And so when I went to see this couple, I walked in that room and she said, "Oh, Pastor, I'm sorry, my hair looks awful. And, I'm so sorry," and all that stuff. I'm thinking, "No, don't worry about it." And of course, I could hear the baby crying and they were bringing the baby and she wants to hold the baby and feed the baby, but I'm there. So that's why my visit was, "Hey, everything okay? Baby came out okay? You're doing okay? Let's have prayer. And then when you get home, my wife and I will stop by to visit you and we can talk at length." That's why I don't have all that information. But I know she wants to have more. So I learned my lesson. And next time that happened, I said, "Hey, I just came from the hospital. So-and-so had a baby. Hey, here's their phone number. Why don't you give them a call?" That way she can ask all her questions. And I'm sure the mother can answer all those questions very happily too. For you as a man, try to share as much information with your wife as possible. When you come home from work and she says, "How was your day?" don't just say, "Fine," because she wants to know more. Don't have to give her an entire report, but, "Well, so I talked to my boss, I finished this project, went out to lunch with my colleagues." That basic information, it's good to share with your wife. If you're the wife, don't interrogate your husband, because, again, it just wears him out. It flusters him, and he may not even have all that information. You mentioned that. I remember one day I received a text message that simply said, "John was in a car accident." That's all that the message said. And I said to my wife, "Look, I just got this text message that says John was in a car accident." And immediately she says, "Was Susan with him?" And I said, "I don't know. It just says John was in a car accident." "Well, did they take him to the hospital?" "It just says John was in a car accident." "Were the kids in the car?" "It just says John was in a car accident." She could ask me 1,000 questions, but I can only give her the information that I have, which is John was in a car accident. That's not that I don't care about John. It's that that's all the information I have. That's all that I can give her. So don't interrogate your husband, because it's flustering, frustrating, and it sometimes gets to the point where he says, "I just don't even want to tell you anything because I know you're going to put me under the light to interrogate me, and I don't want to do that."
Well, the fourth type of listener is the good listener. And this is the person who really tries to understand the feelings that are being expressed. They don't judge. They don't ask 1,000 questions, but they just listen to what is being said. And they also are aware of the nonverbal language that's going on. Not just what the person is saying, but what is their body also telling me? What is their body language also telling me?
As well as the underlying feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So that if I say, "I am frustrated," well, what's under the frustration? Is it because of work related? Is it personal? What's going on? So it's not just a matter of saying, "Okay, I hear you say you're frustrated," but what is that? Where is that coming from? So a good listener will wait to hear. In fact, good communication, active listening in communication means that you wait till you hear and then you paraphrase back what you heard, to make sure. Because if you just say, "Okay, what does that mean? Did you understand what I said? Did you even hear what I said?" So if you paraphrase back, what you're saying is, "Let me make sure I heard correctly what you were telling me." That's how good communication actually happens. Remember the words of James in chapter 1 and verse 19, where he said that we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And that's why someone said the good Lord gave us 2 ears so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. And that's what James, again, in chapter 1, verse 19 says. We should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So We continue to build the house. We've already built the foundation. We built the 2 walls. We finished the first floor. In the next session, then we're going to move on to the second floor of the house as we continue to build a healthy home. And I hope that you join us for our next session. And I hope that you will begin to apply in your home the things that we're talking about. You might say, well, we're already married, so we're not going to have to prepare for marriage. Well, but you can encourage your children or your grandchildren or the young people in your church to prepare for marriage. And if you're already married, this is one area where you can nourish your family, which is to have good communication. Both verbal, nonverbal, and written communication. Make sure that you express yourself correctly and calmly, that you express your thoughts and your feelings, your likes and your dislikes, and that you are a good listener to what others are telling you. And again, in the next session, then we'll move to the second floor as we build the second floor of this home, a healthy home, and we'll see what that entails. So let's have prayer. Right? You close with our prayer.
Okay. Dear Father, we thank you for this opportunity to spend some time together today, talking about how to build a healthy home, the importance of preparing for marriage, the importance of having good communication. May you come in and be the center of every home that's listening to this conversation today. So bless us, and may we reflect you to our neighbors and to the rest of our family. In your name I pray. Amen.
Well, may God bless you as you continue to build your own healthy home for eternity.